One of the most important things in developing young people with learning power is to make them feel that they can actually make progress in their learning. So too often, children come to believe that there are smart people and not so smart people, and so when they're given a challenging task, the first thing they decide is will they succeed? If they think they'll succeed, they might go for it. If they think they might fail, they'll probably avoid challenge, because they think a challenging task is a chance to get shown up. If a different child sees a challenging task as a chance to get smarter, they will engage in it, whether they feel they will succeed or not, because they see a challenging task as a chance to get smarter. So the crucial thing is that every child comes to believe that smart is not something you are, smart is something you get.
I think probably if one, again, goes along with the idea that powerful learning is using your initiative, joining up the dots, using the information you have, one could argue that when that is there as the get-go, that is there automatically. Every child will say, why is the sky blue? Why can't I do this? Well, so automatically they're curious and they're trying to make sense of their little world in their own way. They're trying, with the limited experiences they've had. Like only last night, a friend of mine who's got a 4-year-old said that he had woken up having dreamt of bears, and she thought this was a nightmare. And he said no, he wanted to go back to the bears. It was a nice dream. And she said, well, you can go, you can dream about the bears tonight. And he said, but where are they? She said, well, the bears are in your head. And she said, he looked at her as though she was crazy. How can you have bears in your head? But she was trying to convey what a dream is and what imagination might be to a 4-year-old. But you see, in his limited little world, he was trying to work out where were the bears that he so wanted to be with, that he enjoyed being with. And it's only when someone says, don't be stupid, learn this. This is the right answer, that's wrong. That I think probably that fabulous natural ability, because that's what we've evolved for, is to use our limited experiences to generalise to wider ones. That it could get squashed. I think also, I don't know about in Australia, but in the UK, the emphasis on ticking the boxes, coming up with the right answers, has in a sense eclipsed understanding. And I think that that's a very unfortunate thing, that if all you want is to be seen to get the right answers, and never mind whether you understand them or not, or how you're going to use those answers to apply to other situations, then that's very short term. I think it might make the school look good or the performance record look good in terms of exams, but in terms of the individuals that are coming out, I don't know if they're necessarily going to be the people that are going to be the best of the workforce and the best employees and the best students at university and so on.
I think to become powerful learner, a student needs to work hard, be persistent, and never give up.
I think powerful learners are both born and made. There's, with all everything that we do, there's an interplay between the genetics and your predispositions and the impact of your environment, and when we see that right across the board. I think though that aspect of being born is something that we've not got much, if any, control over, and so then there comes a question about, well, how big an impact does the environment make? How big an impact can we really make? And I think what we see time and time again, from my perspective, when I think about the neuroplasticity of young people and what's going on in their brains, this making connections and breaking connections. In the early years, making loads of new connections, and then in adolescence, cutting away loads of those connections that we don't need anymore, really streamlining our thinking. That dynamic process is telling us that it's always worth the effort. We can always make a difference. And of course, for some kids, the change in the environments that we might make big differences, and then for other kids, it might make small differences. But they all make a difference. There's no unteachable kid. There's no undevelopable kid. We see that impact of the environment really is continuing to have an influence right into adulthood, all the way through our lives, but particularly in childhood. So we see these developmental trajectories in kids, but we also see that there's a wide range of variance, and to a large extent that variance comes from the impact of their environment and their experiences.
I think with very few exceptions, all children are born ready to be powerful learners. So they're born with dispositions that powerful learners need, dispositions such as really wanting to communicate, wanting to reach out, wanting to explore and make sense of the world. And these are dispositions that also, I should say, they also have an appetite to know. They're dispositions that, like all dispositions, we can either kindle or we can extinguish, and that's where the made bit comes in. If we don't look after those dispositions and foster them, kids won't be powerful learners, and so we actually need to be aware of that and help them do that. So yeah, they're both born and they're made.
Oh, look, I think the first one and the key one is curiosity. And actually, personally, I think that almost all students have that in the right environment. And exploration. And, you know, whether that exploration be getting on a bike or and going for a ride or doing mathematics. The second quality I'd suggest for powerful learners and one that's hard for people is risk-taking. People that are prepared to chase an avenue that doesn't necessarily work out or doesn't have any promise of perfection when they start. If we're taking a lifelong approach, then I'd say teamwork and collaboration are critical elements of a powerful learner, because almost all effective work now is done in teams, partnerships, or in collaboration.
This is going to sound rather paradoxical, but my parents were quite poor, which meant that they couldn't afford exotic holidays and lots of entertainments. So I spent, and I was an only child, I was 13, so I spent a lot of time, especially in the holidays, being bored. And I think this is brilliant. I think it's good for a child to be bored, because when you're bored, you have to devise your own stimulation. So I still remember to this day just covering endless exercise books with drawings, you know, making up stories or going to the library. Or I had a little toy theatre, and my poor parents had to watch this plays that I used to put on with this toy theatre with all dolls and things. And what saddens me about today's youth is there's a huge difference, because perhaps you yourself played with toy soldiers, I don't know, or cowboys and Indians, but a toy soldier doesn't ask you to play with it, you know, and a tree doesn't ask you to climb it, and a drawing pad doesn't ask you.
Lego didn't ask me to build it.
No, they're just, so these passive, non-smart things are kind of just, in a sense, props for your narrative, your imagination, your stories, you know, that you're telling, that you're making up, that you're using. And I think this idea of a narrative, this idea of stories, which we're all addicted to, we're wired in to be entranced when someone says, you know, once upon a time. You know, we love this. That's what children used to do, and I think it's very important, because what they're doing there is they're developing their own little conceptual framework, their own way in which they can then try and make things mean things, and actions will have consequences, and the dots will be joined up.
Well, I guess what seems to happen is rather the reverse of, rather than achieving milestones, it does seem that students, as they get older, drop off the things that we'd want. You know, young children start being curious, being creative, exploring ideas for themselves, trying to build the connections. And good teachers in the early years of school actually do that naturally. They encourage the students to explore, to create, to innovate, and to connect ideas, and so on. Now, progressively, as we move up to school, what happens is teachers say, oh, the curriculum is too busy, I better just tell them how to do it. The students then become less willing to take risks. They don't want to make a mistake in front of their friends, and so they wait till they're told what it is to do, so that it's very low in risk. Now, that's exactly the reverse of what we want to happen. What we need to do is we need to encourage the maintenance of the risk-taking approach. We need to encourage students to be able to communicate their ideas and share ideas with each other. We need to encourage students to be willing to stand up in front of the class and to share their idea, to listen to each other, and based on what they hear, to readjust their ideas so that they can go forward with better strategies and more robust strategies.
We do know, as you said, when kids come to school, they're curious, they're full of wonderment, they're risk takers, they explore, they get their hands dirty. If they fall over, they pick themselves up and they have another go. They come to school like that. Our job is to make sure they exit school in the same way.
Well, here's what I think has happened. We celebrate critical thinking everywhere, as far as I can tell. It's okay to put that into a mission statement at this point, and for school boards to talk about it, and so on. But critical thinking, I infer from the way that it's used, critical thinking usually means thinking critically about someone else's ideas. So we're going to read something, we're going to look at a math problem that someone else has given us, we're going to think critically about that. Nowhere does that value coming up with an original idea. And I think we're at the point where if you can't come up with original perspectives, don't have to be absolutely groundbreaking ideas, but original perspectives. And if you don't have the ability to frame a situation or a problem with some kind of originality, I sort of wonder how useful you are anymore.